After lengthy deliberations and careful consideration of the performance of the various candidates, the JSC has unanimously recommended the appointment of Honorable Lady Justice Koome Martha Karabu, Judge of the Court of Appeal, as the Chief Justice of the Republic of Kenya, and has submitted her name to His Excellency the President for appointment.
All right, so that is JST Vice Chair, or shall we say, no, acting chair, we should say. During this whole period, she's been leading those interviews, Professor Olive Mugenda. And there she was on Tuesday announcing the outcome of the 2-week exercise that we've been watching on our TV screens. And Linus, enter Madam CJ. Were you expecting this?
It could have gone any way. There were 10 applicants, I think. And I must say it was a very, very interesting mix of applicants. And remember, it's been very difficult even for media pundits and commentators to project out of these applicants who will be picked. And JSC settled on Martha Koome. And there were those who had projected that Fred Ngatia, lawyer Fred Ngatia, a very experienced, the oldest of the applicants, is it Francis? I hope I got that right. Had a good chance, and we have this report of him protesting that maybe his marks were rigged, and we haven't heard him asking for a recount or a review of the process. But this is a very...
For someone who's been challenging, I mean, in court, I couldn't help but, you know, just marvel at the tinge of irony in all this. I mean, for a man who has been on the other side and defending, you know, with their claims of rigging and everything. So that was spectacular. A lot of irony. I mean, he is discussing process. Yeah. Like, tell us how you got there. How did Martha Koome get the numbers? But it looks like, and Daily Nation reported today with a screaming headline, the fast tracking of the rush to make Martha Koome the next Chief Justice. And I would go straight to how this would play out. It looks like it's going to be a very straightforward hearing and clearing by Parliament and swearing in. After that, the work begins. And the work begins for Martha Koome against the backdrop of a number of things. The first one is that of broken relations between the judiciary and the executive. This is the question that the panelists kept asking. How will you bridge that gap? Because we all know very well that under the tenure of the President of the Supreme Court, Maraga, David, the relationship with the executive, the relationship with President Uhuru Kenyatta was quite testy. But there is something that doesn't sound right. Should it really be about how they personally relate? Government is not a space of friends. It's a space of national interest. You can work with somebody you completely disagree with. And I really hope it doesn't mean that Martha Koome, for her to be an effective Chief Justice, for the judiciary to get its funding as it should, she has to be friendly to government. I think it's a very wrong kind of expectation. The second thing that she'll be obviously facing is, first of all, to shed the cloud of this appointment, of this nomination. Because when you hear Fred Ngatia talking of numbers were messed up with by some commissioners, we don't know that. But, you know, it's a stain. It's not a clean nomination. And talk of deep state, talk of certain interests actually having candidates on who should become Chief Justice. If she is appointed, she will have about 9 years in that office because she's only 61. And judges serve up to the age of 70.
Or 10 years.
Or 10 years.
First, yeah.
So the challenge would be, look, how will you overcome that tag? And finally, I just want to say, I mean, we know Martha Koome. Joe, when we were young reporters out there, when starting out, she was in FIDA.
FIDA, yes.
And very, very vocal.
Formidable chair, yeah.
A formidable chair, a person who fought for especially the rights of women and children, and also the democratic space. She was big on that. But there's something I need to say here, which we should also be observing. People changed a lot after President Daniel Arap Moi left office. Even church leaders who used to fight for certain principles and values suddenly changed and retreated. They don't do that as energetically as they used to do under President Moi. We will be observing, a lot of Kenyans, some Kenyans will be observing whether Martha Koome will remain that firebrand she was in that space that we found as young reporters, democratic values, human rights, a very strong crusader and defender of the right thing. Because what has happened and what we've seen in the last 10, 15 years is that change where people actually depart from values they used to stand for when Moi was president. Just because there have been changes, I mean, we've had 2 presidents since Moi departed. But the challenges, especially in the human rights space, democratic space, all remain the same. And even more difficult now for the judiciary, because there are those Kenyans, and a majority of them actually, that consider that Maraga set the bar very, very high in terms of defending the freedom of the judiciary, in terms of defending the principle of separation of powers. He stood very, very clearly. And in terms of also coming out clearly on the issue of integrity, he did very, very well. And those are the challenges that Martha Koome, that is the script, that is the report card that she really has to match.
I mean, Jamila, I know I saw signs that you want to come in. But it has to be said, of course, without, I mean, everything else notwithstanding, that this really is a historic moment in that respect. I mean, this is, whatever happens from this moment on, theoretically at least there is still a stage in Parliament and the formal appointment by the President, but the mere fact that she has been nominated makes her the first woman to be nominated for the position of CJ in our history, and that is not a small matter. I think it's something that is quite inspirational to a lot of people who have been fighting for gender equity in this country, and also the aspirations of the Constitution to see a more sort of rights-based approach to public management. And I think that's something that is worth pointing out here because of just how historic, how unprecedented this really is. But
yeah, in fact, in one swoop, what they're saying, the 10-year battle to meet the gender rule regarding the composition of this court was just more than met. Because if she does get the position, which with all indications she will, we'll have a CJ who's a woman, and then we'll have the deputy CJ, and then we'll have the Supreme Court Judge Chokindungu, which means the threshold has been met. And I think when I was watching
3 out of 7.
Yes, which is fine. Believe me, ilikuwa 1, ilikuwa 2. Ilikuwa 2. So when I was watching the interviews, because for 10 straight days we were watching the interviews there, and I think for Martha Koome, she came across as confident and prepared. And I think she had learned her lesson from when she lost to the now acting CJ, Judge Mwelu, for the the position of deputy CJ. When she ran for it the first time, she went through the JSC process and lost. And I think she learned from that, because this time she came, she could answer all the questions. You can understand this, someone who's been in the system, having been in it for over 30 years, worked in various capacities, worked in different courts in different parts of this country, so she knew what she was talking about. And I think for her, she'll have a huge role. In fact, someone was saying a starring role when you're looking at transition of power after the next general elections. I think the way things are looking, this would be a contested election, and chances are it may end up in her court. So how will she play? people will be looking to see how she will rule. It's very important. And I think you talked about the relationship between the judiciary and the executive. I think the relationship between the past judiciary, that is the chairman, the CJ David Maraga, and the executive, ili yumba after the 2017 presidential petition and the ruling that he announced. And I think for her, that would be something people would be looking at. She's the first female CJ. We have this election that is coming out in 2022. How will she rule if it ends up in the Supreme Court? That's number one. And number two, I think something else that we need to look at is that if the BBI passes, there are a few changes that will be introduced as that will affect or that have an effect on the presidential petitions. The fact that they want the period for hearing the case and determining it to be moved from I think 14 days to about a month. That's new. And if the BBI is passed, she'll be the first CJ to work with the judiciary ombudsman. Remember that proposal had been rejected by even Maraga, saying it will affect the independence of the judiciary. And I think finally one of the issues also that she will have to deal with is the appointment of the 41 judges. And I remember when she spoke about it. Who are 40 now,
and I think we can listen to that because she spoke about it.
Yeah.
So we must discuss this issue of 41 with the president in that atmosphere of we are serving Kenyans, all of us, and we are concerned about the administration of justice, and we find out where the problem is, resolve it, and get the judges in office.
Interesting. She says it will be solved through negotiation. And I remember I was listening to each of the applicants when they were being interviewed. Each one had a solution to the issue of the 41 judges. And finally, Yvonne, I'm going to hand over to you. But before I do, I think another issue that she has to deal with now are the cases in court about the BBI process. And the proponents of the BBI process are going to watch keenly and see how the matter will play out. Because of the court cases, IBC has been stopped from for preparing for the referendum in any way, shape or form. So I think that's another issue that will be looked at very keenly as CJ, hopefully CJ Koome takes over. Yvonne, I'm handing over to you.
And Yvonne, on that issue of the appointment of the 41, now 40 judges, she actually said should pick up the phone and call the president. And I remember the Lady Justice Mwelu asking, does my lady have an assurance that her calls will be picked? And I think her response at that point was that she's not the one who tried to call, so she will still have to try and call. So we will really, that would literally be the first thing on her entry that will give a signal on, whether there's anything that has changed between, the judiciary and the executive. I
found that question particularly curious, and it was asked to every candidate. What would you do? Where are we with that stage now of the appointment of the 40? The ball is not in the court of the judiciary. The ball is actually in the court of the president, right? We all know what the Constitution says about the role that he plays in this one. The names were forwarded to him, and we know that his role is to then appoint. So I found it curious that people are being made to say, so what will you do about it? When the real question we should be asking is, what is the president going to do about it? To date, he has not said who of the 40, now 40, he's had an issue with. And unfortunately, one of them has died awaiting the resolution of this crisis. He has not said who he has issues with, what those issues are. Some of them are sitting judges within the judiciary. And we all know, and I imagine the president does as well, that you form a tribunal, if you have problems with sitting judges. Because if indeed he has problems with some of them, maybe one of them is a sitting judge, then the president is in essence saying he's happy with that person of questionable integrity and character and is still sitting there. I mean, for me, the ball is really on the other side.
No, but it was more like the judiciary here is a client. Someone is supposed to supply you with things and they are not.
Yes,
so
I understand that, but I just found that it seemed like the burden, of resolving this was shifting to the candidates as opposed to, where it rightfully sits with that. So, I found that interesting. But I think for me also the issue of how does she deal with independence of the various arms of government? Remember, retired CJ David Maraga declared Parliament unconstitutional, for instance. Where does she take things from where he left? There was the issue of revisit. This is what is in her entry. I was reading the State of Judiciary report for the year 2019-2020, and they were talking about some of the achievements and the challenges over the last year. So there were 61 courts that were under construction construction, 28 of which were funded by a World Bank project, the other 33 by government. So get this, and these were some of the things that we talked about were manifestations of the revisit. So in the previous year, 2018-2019, the judiciary received about 2 billion shillings for development. In 2019-2020, they received just 50 million. And so many of the courts that were being funded by government have in fact stalled. Those projects have remained unfinished. These are some of the things she's getting into the backlog. And there was a legacy of David Maraga, who started, this program of trying to make sure that, the case backlog is reduced, more courts, access to justice, going to far-flung areas, mobile courts. Of course, those started obviously under the previous regime as well. But these are some of the things that now she has to deal with. And for me, the questions that were being asked were based on relationship. So, can you pick up the phone and talk to the president and talk to the executive to get the judges and perhaps to get funds released when that shouldn't be the case. It should be a clear separation for me. I think the other issue that would be there, of course, is the elections. Those BBI cases, many of them might end up all the way up until the Supreme Court. So what does that look like? And coming from a Supreme Court that had 3. We've had now, 3 presidential petitions in the country so far. The first under Justice William Mutunga, and then now the 2 under these ones. What would that happen? Like you said, Jamila, the way things are going, it's definitely headed in that direction. So for me, those are some of the things that she has to do, and, creating that. And whilst it is a great win, for women, and this is definitely a moment, and we must pause to take a look at that. I like what she said about, leadership. It's not gendered, it is what it is. You get it done, and you get it done the right way. And I guess that, for me, I think will be the biggest thing, because everybody will be saying, oh, you're ruling like that because you're a woman, you're making decisions like that because you're a woman. And so for her, it'll be really interesting to see the direction she takes it. She's already stated that she's going to do that. One last thing, I think the vetting would have been very different pre-handshake. With 2 sides on the opposing sides. I mean, if you've seen all of the tweets right now from, both sides of the divide, everybody, congratulating her for getting the nomination. I suspect that this will be a smooth sailing process for her, but I think it would have been different pre-2018.
Joe, I look at it from a process point of view, as opposed to an outcome point of view. This journey began with the reconstitution of the Judicial Service Commission. And you remember a year or so ago, we mentioned about it, and it gave us an indicator that look at how the Judicial Service Commission has been reconstituted. A few of the commissioners who retired and who replaced them would have given you an idea of the likely outcome of the nomination process for the Chief Justice. But suffice to say, I don't look at Justice Martha Koome more from a gender point of view, but from a qualification point of view. Is she qualified for the job? Very much so. Because she's been a judge for 18 years and had practiced law for 15 years as a lawyer. So 33 years in total, that she's qualified, totally qualified. The challenge now is what were theoretical aspects during the interview, now putting them into practice, because I highly doubt there will be any roadblock for her in Parliament. Look at even the area of congratulations from members of Parliament. Gave you an indicator that when her name gets to the floor of the House, it will be a smooth sail. So we can as well start preparing for Madam Chief Justice, so to say. But now the question that will be more profound in practice now rather than in theory during the interviews was the independence of the judiciary and the interdependent nature of the 3 arms of government. I remember one of her sound bites, and I wish we cut it. She said, when you see me with the president, it is not a beauty contest. So it basically says she understands and realizes the role and the function and the independence of the judiciary on one hand, but at the same time, the relationship between the 3 arms of government, because it is not going to be possible for judiciary to work alone. It will require Parliament where resources are appropriated. It will require the function of the executive, because these functions work together. So much as the question of the relationship between the main players or the leaders of the three arms of government is concerned, as Lina says, and I agree with him 100%, it should not be so much about whether the president likes the Chief Justice or whether the Speaker likes the president or whether the Chief Justice likes the president. It should be a scenario where each of the arms of government realizes their functions, their independence, but at the same time appreciating the role that the other arms of government play. And they don't have to agree. It's not a question of let us work together so that we agree. It is a question of holding your turf solidly so, and where the executive falters, remind the executive that here you've gone wrong. When it has done well, so be it. But more fundamentally, I hope when she gets into office, she will get an opportunity to push for independence of the judiciary in terms of finances.
Funding, yeah.
Because every time that the judiciary is starved of resources, it is one of the easiest ways of revisiting, because a judiciary that has no resources is a judiciary that will not be able to work. And finally, I think it was also a factor of external forces versus internal challenges in the judiciary. Other than what we see as external forces, there are also internal challenges within the judiciary, because truth be told, when you talk to many people who have for years been walking the corridors of justice in search of justice, they will tell you they have a problem with certain magistrates, certain judges, certain clerks, and so on and so forth. So this is her very, very important assignment, so to say, when she gets into that office, because those internal challenges are as critical as the external challenges that the judiciary faces. The independence of the judiciary is not just protecting it from intrusion by other forces, by other arms of government. It is also independence internally, such that those who are in search of justice are able to get that justice from that. So I think that is the scorecard ordinary citizens will expect of her.
And Joe, just a quick comment on the working relationships between the different arms of government. And when you look at the term of David Maraga, one of the biggest problems that really put the judiciary at collision course with the executive is the blatant defiance of court orders by the executive. Yep. So a good relationship is not a conspiracy by the arms of government to break the law. What the Chief Justice, when and if she is confirmed, Martha Koome should be very worried about is that trend of court orders being disobeyed by government, because it's a very bad statement on the entire state of the rule of law. And what the country is looking for is not a Chief Justice that will look away when the law is broken by the government, by the executive especially. They need a Chief Justice that will say, no, let's respect the law, let's follow the law. Which is why, Yvonne, you mentioned and quoted Martha Koome saying that she is going to call and negotiate or discuss with the president about the 41 judges.
40,
and I agree with
40 actually now.
40 judges. Should it be a negotiation?
Yeah.
Should it really be a negotiation?
No.
Isn't the law there that
the law
guides?
Is clear.
I don't like when the lawyers keep saying
the law is very clear.
The law is clear, because clearly it's not clear to everybody. so I mean, we need to choose, because if the executive observes the law, then they'll not run into problems with the judiciary. I would, for example, be interested to hear if the matter of the appointment of CSs, which has been declared unconstitutional, illegal, if it ended in the Supreme Court, how she would rule. Because would you look the other side? That is not a good way to have a good working relationship between arms of government.
But I think because a small one. I think the first point then would be, when she gets into office, to find out from the president why these 40 judges have not been appointed? Because I think that is the fundamental question.
But he's been asked that already, and he's been asked that in a court of law, I believe, and he has not said anything about it.
That would be... She said she's not the one who asked.
Yes,
so ask again.
Precisely. Okay. Why haven't they been appointed? I don't think all of them, the 40 of them, have integrity questions. So who has? Because some of those judges are already serving in our courts. So who has? And if they have integrity issues, why are they still serving almost 1 year later if they have integrity questions? So I think that would be a very important place to start because the independence of the judiciary and the interdependence with other agencies comes to play. But as we say, it is not a question of agreeing. It's a question of finding a working relationship. While